These Republican leaders have not been content with attacks on me, on my wife, or on my sons. No, not content with that. They now include my little dog, Sally. Well, of course, I resent attacks, and my family don't resent attacks. But Sally does resent attacks.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, is a figure who stands astride the American 20th century like a colossus, elected to an unprecedented 4 terms and steering the nation through its 2 most profound crises since the Civil War, the Great Depression and World War II, with a unique blend of patrician confidence, political genius, and profound personal resilience, forged in the crucible of a debilitating illness that would have ended the ambitions of a lesser individual. Born on January 30, 1882, into immense privilege and influence at the family estate in Hyde Park, New York, he was the only child of James Roosevelt and Sarah Delano Roosevelt, growing up in an environment of wealth, private tutors, and European travel, instilling in him from his earliest days the unshakable confidence and optimism that would later become his political trademark.
I am a pacifist, but I believe you and I will act together to protect and to defend our science, our culture, our American freedom, and our civilization.
A character shaped by the Groton School's ethos of public service under the mentorship of Endicott Peabody and later honed at Harvard University, where he immersed himself in campus politics and edited the Harvard Crimson, and subsequently at Columbia Law School, though his passion was always for politics and history rather than the intricacies of legal code, a fact reflected in his lackluster academic performance and his decision to drop out after passing the New York bar exam in 1907. His personal life took a momentous turn in 1905 despite the objections of his possessive mother. He married his 5th cousin once removed, Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, a shy and intellectually serious young woman who would herself evolve into one of the most consequential and active first ladies in American history, a partnership that was as much a political alliance as a marital one, though it would be tested by personal trials, including his intense relationship with his secretary, Lucy Mercer, which nearly ended in divorce in 1918, an event that profoundly changed the emotional dynamic of their marriage but ultimately solidified a powerful, if complex, political collaboration. His political career began in earnest in 1910 when he won a seat as a Democrat in the traditionally Republican New York State Senate, quickly making a name for himself as a progressive reformer who fought against the corruption of Tammany Hall, the powerful Democratic political machine in New York City, an early display of the independence and reformist zeal that would define his career, and his effective work on the campaign trail for Woodrow Wilson in 1912 earned him an appointment as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a role he held for 7 years during World War I, giving him invaluable executive branch experience and a deep understanding of naval affairs that would prove crucial decades later. And it was during this time that he first crossed paths on the world stage with Winston Churchill, then the British First Lord of the Admiralty, a fleeting encounter that prefigured their monumental wartime alliance. The summer of 1921, however, brought the defining personal catastrophe of his life. While vacationing at the family's summer home on Campobello Island in New Brunswick, Canada, he was stricken with a sudden, severe illness that was diagnosed as poliomyelitis, leaving him permanently paralyzed from the waist down at the age of 39, a shattering blow that many assumed would terminate his public life, but through a ferocious determination that he rarely displayed in his earlier, more facile existence. He fought to regain some measure of mobility, enduring years of painful therapy and establishing a rehabilitation center in Warm Springs, Georgia, which became a second home and a source of deep personal connection with other polios, an experience that fundamentally transformed him, burning away any remaining arrogance and replacing it with a profound empathy for human suffering and an iron will that would equip him for the trials ahead. And with the crucial support of his wife Eleanor and his political advisor Louis Howe, who worked tirelessly to keep his name alive in Democratic politics, he staged an improbable comeback, appearing at the 1924 Democratic National Convention on crutches to nominate New York Governor Al Smith for president in a speech hailed as a stirring appeal of courage, and in 1928, he was elected governor of New York, a position from which he launched innovative relief programs to combat the growing economic distress of the early Depression, establishing himself as a forward-thinking leader prepared to use the power of government to address societal ills. The 1932 presidential election occurred amidst the absolute depths of the Great Depression, with nearly a quarter of the workforce unemployed, thousands of banks failing, and a palpable sense of national despair, and Roosevelt, with his radiant optimism and promises of a new deal for the American people. Soundly defeated the beleaguered incumbent, Herbert Hoover, and in his inaugural address on March 4, 1933, he famously declared, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," a masterful rhetorical move that immediately began to restore national confidence, and he followed this words with a breathtaking whirlwind of legislative activity known as the First 100 Days, pushing through Congress a sweeping array of programs and agencies designed to provide.
Having taken the solemn oath of office, in the presence of my fellow countrymen, in the presence of our God, I know that it is America's purpose that we shall not fail. In the days and the years that come, we shall work for a just and honorable peace, a durable peace, as today we work and fight for a total victory in war.
Immediate relief, promote recovery, and enact lasting reform, creating a new, active role for the federal government in the lives of ordinary Americans through entities like the Civilian Conservation Corps, which put young men to work on conservation projects, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, which sought to raise farm prices by paying farmers to reduce production, the Tennessee Valley Authority, a massive public works project to develop the impoverished Tennessee Valley region, and the National Recovery Administration, which attempted to stabilize industry through codes of fair competition. And while not all of these initial programs were successful, the NRA was later declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. They demonstrated a relentless energy and a willingness to experiment that galvanized the nation and established the template for the modern American welfare state. His leadership style was intensely personal and direct. He pioneered the use of the new medium of radio with his Fireside Chats, speaking to millions of Americans in their living rooms in a calm, conversational tone, explaining his policies and building an unprecedented bond of trust with the public. And throughout the 1930s, he continued to expand the New Deal with a second New Deal that included the Works Progress Administration, which employed millions in a vast array of public works projects, from building bridges to employing artists and writers, the Social Security Act of 1935, which created a system of old age pensions and unemployment insurance, forming the cornerstone of the American social safety net, and the National Labor Relations Act, which guaranteed workers the right to unionize and bargain collectively, dramatically altering the balance of power between labor and capital. His political coalition, the New Deal Coalition, was a broad and durable alliance that brought together urban workers, ethnic minorities, labor unions, white Southerners, and intellectuals, realigning American politics for a generation and making the Democratic Party the dominant force. But his presidency was not without fierce opposition. Conservatives and business leaders accused him of dictatorship and socialism, and the Supreme Court struck down several key New Deal programs, leading Roosevelt to overreach in 1937 with a politically disastrous court packing. Planned to appoint additional justices, a move that damaged his prestige and emboldened his opponents. Yet the underlying popularity of his reforms remained, and he achieved a landslide re-election victory in 1936 and won an unprecedented third term in 1940, breaking the long-standing two-term tradition established by George Washington. As the gathering storm of war in Europe began to overshadow domestic concerns, suggesting a collective effort to contain aggressor nations, and then, after war broke out in Europe in 1939, he began a concerted effort to support the Allies, most famously with the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, which allowed him to lend vital war supplies to Britain and later the Soviet Union, characterizing the United States as the arsenal of democracy. And he also took steps to strengthen the nation's own military preparedness.
Mussolini came to the reluctant conclusion that the jig was up. He could see the shadow of the long arm of justice. But he and his fascist gang will be brought to book and punished for their crimes against humanity.
All while promising a wary American public, your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign wars. The Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, instantly ended the isolationist debate and unified the nation for war, and Roosevelt, the master of domestic politics, now had to become a master of global strategy, working in close, and often tense, concert with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin to form the Grand Alliance against the Axis powers, and he made the fateful strategic decision, in agreement with Churchill, to prioritize the defeat of Nazi Germany first while conducting a holding action in the Pacific against Japan, a decision that shaped the entire course of the war. He oversaw the monumental task of mobilizing the entire American economy for total war.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation. The American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
A feat of industrial organization that ultimately proved decisive, and he became the architect of the post-war world order, envisioning a system of international cooperation to prevent future conflicts, a vision articulated in the Atlantic Charter with Churchill and realized through the initial planning for the United Nations, but the immense physical and mental strain of leading the nation for 12 years through 2 apocalyptic crises, combined with his always fragile health, began to take its toll, and as the war in Europe neared its end, he traveled to the resort town of Yalta in the Crimea in February 1945 for a second conference with Churchill and Stalin to discuss the final defeat of Germany and the difficult questions of the post-war world, including the fate of Poland and the structure of the United Nations, a conference where he, already gravely ill and exhausted, faced a determined and opportunistic Stalin, and the agreements reached at Yalta would later become a subject of intense controversy and criticism from those who felt he had been outmaneuvered and had conceded too much of Eastern Europe to Soviet domination. Returning from Yalta, he went to his beloved Warm Springs retreat to rest, and on the afternoon of April 12, 1945, while sitting for a portrait, he suddenly complained of a terrific headache and collapsed unconscious from a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Dying hours later at the age of 63, a nation still at war was plunged into shock and mourning, having lost the only president an entire generation had ever known, and the mantle of leadership passed to his vice president, the former Missouri Senator Harry S. Truman, who would see the war to its conclusion. Roosevelt's legacy is as vast and complex as the era he dominated. He is rightly credited with saving American democracy from collapse by demonstrating that a liberal, capitalist system could reform itself to provide security and opportunity for its citizens, thereby staving off the extremist ideologies of both the far right and far left that were consuming other nations, and he fundamentally redefined the relationship between the American people and their government, establishing its responsibility for the economic well-being of its citizens. And on the world stage, his leadership was indispensable in defeating fascism and laying the groundwork for the international institutions that defined the post-war period. Yet critics argue that his expansion of federal power created a bloated, bureaucratic state, that some of his economic policies prolonged the Depression, and that his handling of relations with Stalin at Yalta ceded too much influence to the Soviet Union, helping to precipitate the Cold War, and his record on civil rights, particularly his acquiescence to the internment of Japanese Americans on war and his reluctance to challenge Southern segregationists in his own party for fear of fracturing his New Deal coalition, remains a significant and troubling blemish on his record. Nevertheless, Franklin D. Roosevelt endures as a figure of monumental historical importance, a man of privilege who became the champion of the common man, an optimist who guided the nation through its darkest hours, and a paralyzed leader who mobilized a nation and a world for a titanic struggle, leaving behind a nation transformed and a world forever shaped by his vision, his will, and his indomitable spirit.